Hi, I'm Novel Mike, and this is my opinion. So, this is going to be my last video for Trails of Cold Steel and Trails of Cold Steel 2. I've made many videos on both games, and while I didn't cover everything in Trails of Cold Steel 2, I mean, simply put, play the game if you haven't already. If you're a fan of the first one, absolutely play it. But today I want to talk about probably the least discussed feature out of these games and why it's so important to these games, and to me, why every other RPG out there needs to look at these games and learn something. And that's the NPCs. I've been playing a lot of Dragon Quest VII on the 3DS, and when I'm going around and I'm talking to characters, if I talk to a cook, he's called a cook. If I talk to, a waitress, she's called a waitress. If I talk to a shopkeeper, he's called shopkeeper, or, something like that. They don't have names, they don't have personalities, they don't have goals. And after playing Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, and the other Legend of Heroes games as well, I don't think that any game really compares to how you can build a world like those games. Cold Steel and Cold Steel 2, every character you meet for the most part has some kind of personality, has a name, they have a goal, they have something that they're doing with their lives. Even little kids that don't really interact with you much, they have something that they're doing, even if they're just playing around or picking on each other. They're doing something together, and as you progress through these games, you get to actually see how they develop and how their stories develop. You see a lot of this in the first game in Trista because you're in that same location, but the same is the thing that happens in Cold Steel 2. When you start in one area early on in the game and then you come back to it later, you see that things have changed for these people. And you may have a lot to do or you may have very little to do with it. But they react to what's happened to them, what's going on in this war, what's going on in their own lives, what's going on with each other, and how it defines them and how it defines essentially the world. What this does is it gives you a sense that this is a place you could really go to. It makes the world come alive, unlike any other RPG series I've ever played. Like even games like Fallout, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, and other Bethesda games that name NPCs and stuff like that, they never give you the kind of detail for each of these little characters that you see like these games do. And even when they try, they don't come even close to really setting up what these games do that really just make the world feel so much more real and immersive. And it's not just that it makes the world feel better to the player, it does an amazing job with showing how not only how the player should feel about the situations that they're in by seeing emotions from these characters, but it shows you essentially how to actually build a world via the NPCs. In the end, Class 7 and the main characters you're playing as are the ones that are moving the story forward. But these characters are the ones that are living in that world that you're making. And they're the ones that are reacting to it. And they're the ones that have to actually, that are talking to each other and talking to you about what you've done and what they've seen you do and what they've heard of what you've done, that kind of thing. And they know that it's important and it makes everything seem more real. They talk not just about themselves, but they talk about the economy. They talk about, what they want to do with their lives, what they are doing with their lives, what they should have done, why they didn't do things, that kind of thing. Every character says something different. You'll never talk to a character twice or two different characters and hear the same thing or even something similar. They all have different stories to tell. And as the game progresses, you see little mini arcs of each of these characters play out. And it's just absolutely fantastic to see. And more games should do this because it makes everything in this game better. It makes me want to find out just as much about Class 7 and what's going on with them as it does about the Thor students that escaped, about what's going on in the Nord Highlands and all the characters involved there, and at Zender Gate and all these other places. I can think of almost every location off the top of my head that I went to in Trails of Cold Steel 1 and 2, and I couldn't think of even the last 2 towns I went to in Dragon Quest VII or any other RPG I played recently. And the reason I know those things is because these NPCs, and they talk about it because they become real places. They talk about not just the town they're living in, but their lives, and it makes you engrossed in each little story that you see. And it's so vastly important because as an RPG, the whole point of the game is essentially the narrative. And when you make the narrative about even the smallest character having some sort of thing to say, it makes your narrative expand exponentially. And no other game series I've seen does it. And as long as the Legend of Heroes series does it, I will buy every single game they make. Because no other game I have played has done what these games have done. And it's a shame because it's such an easy thing to do. It just takes time and resources. And instead of maybe trying to make the graphics as super impressive as they can, they should try to just make worlds more alive. Like, even if you're not even talking RPGs, when you think of open world games like Grand Theft Auto, Assassin's Creed, Watch Dogs, those kind of things, like, they may name their characters, but they don't have stories, they don't have arcs, they don't have, you know, interactions with you or each other, really. Like, you may see two characters talking, but there's no arc to that story, really. They don't actually talk to each other and develop relationships and, you know, have you interact with them, and you can either help them in some cases, sometimes you can't, but you get to see them progress as you get further and further into the game. As time goes on, their lives go on. And it's just something that every game company out there, if you're making any kind of open world game or RPG, this is something you should pay attention to, because it really does make your world come alive. And without things like this, they just feel shallow. When I think of open world games, I've always had a problem with how they're presented, because you're essentially playing a character in a massive world with tons of characters. But the problem is that there's not really characters involved. There's, you know, the characters you play as and the main people that move the plot forward, but you can't just walk up to Joe Schmo at the shoe store and find out what he thinks about everything. And in Cold Steel you can. And it may not seem like it's a big deal, but the way that it enriches the experience, it's probably the most important detail that most every other RPG ignores. And I just think that's a shame. And more games should do it. This is my final video for Trails of Cold Steel 2. I hope you've enjoyed these. If you're a fan of the series, you know, please keep playing them. Lord knows we need more of them. And if you haven't played them yet, and you've wanted to know why I love them so much, I hope this video's helped you out. I'm Novel Mike, thank you for watching, and next week I promise there will be something different besides Trails of Cold Steel next week. Thanks everyone, bye bye.